another episode of Exit Rich podcast. I'm so excited because we're actually having a famous person that I'm going to be interviewing today. His name is William Cohan. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
William Cohan. I want to make sure. And so William Cohen has quite the experience and quite the resume. And I tell you, I think he's pretty much done almost everything there is to do. he continues he continues to create. So William Cohen is a former senior Wall Street M&A investment banker for 17 years at Lazard. I'm probably going to mispronounce this. Lazard Frères.
Lazard Frères, which actually started in New Orleans.
Oh, it did.
Yes,
Probably off of
started by three French brothers who moved from the Alsace region of France in the 1848 area to New Orleans and opened a women's fashion clothing store and was in New Orleans for 1 year when a fire swept through the store. They saved the inventory and then moved to San Francisco and opened a store to sell clothing and other merchandise to gold miners during the gold rush. And then they
Oh
got into the
wow.
gold business and then the banking business.
You remember what part of New Orleans? I'm just curious.
Oh, goodness. No, I,
I'm
I
downtown New
assume it
Orleans,
was, the business district, such as it was in 1848.
which is exactly where I am. on Poitras.
So you're probably in now the old storefront that used to be Lazard Brothers store.
Probably. what a great bit of history. I'll have to go look that up. And then you've also have worked with Merrill Lynch and JPMorgan Chase. He is. Now listen to this, guys. I'm trying to make my first New York Times bestseller. I am a Wall Street Journal and USA Today. I haven't made a New York Times yet, but William is a three times New York Times best-selling author of nonfiction narratives about Wall Street. Interesting. Have any of those been made into movies yet?
No, although
No?
there's talk about one of them
Oh,
being
really?
made into a
Okay.
movie. Yeah.
So you have to tell me which one. But Money and Power, How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World. Can't wait to read that one. And that was the first time Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year award, right?
Uh, Actually, it was the book about Lazard called the Last Tycoons was the one
Oh,
that won the 2007
okay.
Financial Times Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year award.
Congratulations. And then we have House of Cards. I love the name. A Tale of Ubres and Richard, if I'm saying that right, Richard, Excess on Wall Street. Excess on Wall Street. And then anything to add there?
That's the one that's potentially being made into a uh, you know TV series.
And then there's a third book. What is the third one that I'm leaving out?
Well, there's Last Tycoons, House of Cards, Money and Power about Goldman Sachs, all New York Times bestsellers, and then a book called The Price of Silence that was about the Duke lacrosse scandal that was also a New York Times bestseller.
What was that scandal about? That was your four friends, right? At Duke?
Four Friends was a different book.
Oh
The,
my gosh, we have so many books I can't keep up.
yeah, The Price of Silence was about the 2006 lacrosse scandal at Duke, where I went to, where I'm a graduate, and so I wanted to write about what happened.
And was that New York Times?
That was
No,
New York Times bestseller. Yes,
that was too. Okay,
yes.
awesome. And then you have a book that came out about four friends, right?
Right, four friends of mine from high school called Four Friends, and then my new book, which is called Power Failure: The Rise and Fall of an American Icon, which is about the rise and fall of GE, the General Electric Company.
Yes, and we're going to dig into that. So, and that book, ladies and gentlemen, to all my listeners, comes out November 15th. November 15th. So you need to race out and get your copy. We'll tell you where you can get a copy of of the rise and fall of an American hero, which is called Power Failure. So Power Failure, GE story. But let's talk a little bit more about you because you're so phenomenal. So for 13 years, William was a special correspondent at Vanity Fair. I love Vanity Fair. He also writes or has written for ProPublica, the Financial Times, the New York Times, Institutional Investor, Bloomberg Business Week, the Atlantic Fast Company, The Nation, Fortune, Political, Art News, and Barron's. Now that's a lot. I write for Inc. He previously wrote a biweekly opinion column for the New York Times, an opinion column for Bloomberg View, as well as for the Deal Book section of the New York Times. He is a non-staff on-air contributor to CNBC and also appears on CNN and MSNBC and the BBC TV. He also has appeared 3 times as a guest on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, The News Hour, the Charlie Lausch Show, and then the Tavis Smiley Show and CBS This Morning, as well as numerous NPR, BBC, and Bloomberg radio programs. He was formerly a contributing editor for Bloomberg TV. And there's more. Like we said earlier, he is a graduate of Phillips Academy, Andover, that was known as, right? Andover, and went to Duke University and Columbia University School of Journalism and the Columbia University Graduate School of Business. He lives in New York City with his wife and sometimes his 2 sons. So welcome to the show, William Cohan. It's my absolute pleasure to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I really want to dive into your book, but before I do, you've accomplished so much, and you continue to accomplish and create and write. And I can't even, was there anything that I missed? And what were you like as a little boy?
You didn't miss anything. Obviously I spent 17 years on Wall Street, but that's, ancient history and long and involved. But I had the typical upbringing, middle-class upbringing in central Massachusetts. Watched the Three Stooges and other sitcoms. There were only 3 TV stations back then, black and white TV. That became color. There was no streaming, no cable, no clicker to change the channels. So you did your homework, you watched some TV, you read the newspaper. Typical American upbringing in the early 1960s.
So what was your favorite Stooge? Larry, Curly, or Moe?
I liked Shemp. I don't know if you remember Shemp.
I don't remember Shemp.
Yeah, he had dark hair. He was a bit goofy. No, they were great. I love the Three Stooges. My mother hated it when I watched them, but I loved them.
So only 3 comedies, only 3 shows?
Yeah, there was only 3 TV stations, networks. There was ABC, NBC, and CBS.
Yeah. Wow.
That was it.
So what were your other favorite sitcoms?
Oh, I loved I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched and McHale's Navy and F Troop. People don't even know what that is anymore. Gilligan's Island. These were all great shows. People talk now about the golden age of television, but back then there were some great sitcoms, powerfully great sitcoms. Influenced a whole generation of Americans.
Yeah, I remember I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched. I used to watch those for sure. All right, so let's talk about. You spent 17 years on Wall Street. What can you tell us about M&A? I do M&A. I buy and sell, fix and grow companies. I've been doing it for 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
let's kind of dive into M&A. What do you see as the future of M&A as you knew it in the past?
Well, you know this.
Yeah, I know,
M&A,
but my listeners might not
yeah,
know it.
right. Well, I'm saying, M&A advisory work goes through cycles when valuations are high and CEOs are feeling confident about the future of their company, and their stock prices are high, so they can use the stock as currency. There's a lot of M&A business. So, in the last few years, not 2022, but 2021, 2020, we're talking, several $trillion worth of M&A business. So, kind of numbers that, in terms of volume, that, uh, you know, that I, when I was in my heyday on Wall Street, could only dream about. But this year that's way down, and because the markets, the equity markets are have reversed. The debt markets are pretty closed, and the confidence level among CEOs is way down. So I thought, interestingly, kind of this week there are a couple of big deals that are starting to happen again. Johnson and Johnson bought a medical drug company, and Blackstone bought a division of Emerson Electric. I mean, so
Mhm.
uh, you know, things are happening a little bit, but the volumes are way down, and that's just the way it is.
Mhm. Yeah, it was up in 2021 for sure. Do you feel, I know you don't like labels, but do you feel we're in a recession, headed towards a recession? What's your thoughts?
Well, you're right. I don't, people like to say, "Oh my God, are we in a quote unquote recession?" I mean, to me, there's the old saying, you know, recession is when your friend is out of work, and a depression is when you're out of work. Uh, at the moment, with unemployment rate being so low, employment being, near at or near all-time highs, as long as people are gainfully employed and getting paid, they do feel the effects of inflation, obviously, eating deeper and deeper into that paycheck. But as long as you've got a job and are getting a steady income, it's hard to feel like we're, in a recession, or that the economy is so bad. Obviously, with the Fed raising interest rates intentionally and deliberately, and they'll probably raise another 75 basis points today, that is going to ripple through the economy, and access to capital is going to be more expensive and is going to slow way down, and that will definitely slow the economy down. Whether it results technically in a recession, remains to be seen. I don't really think it matters. What matters is how people feel about how far their paychecks go, whether they can afford to buy the things that they need. Food is expensive, gas is expensive. Everything always seems expensive, and especially so today. As long as that's the way people feel, then that's not great for the economy. But as long as they also still have their job, I think we'll be okay. When waves of layoffs start coming, that's when people start really feeling it, and whether or not we'll technically be in a recession or not. So
Mhm.
I think we're sort of pre-recession, because layoffs are coming and the economy is slowing, and that's going to mean more and more job losses, and that's sort of a spiral downward that we'll all begin to feel soon enough.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, people are just going to have to budget, um, and get rid of some discretionary spending. I see that I see the Fed's increase of interest rates is definitely killing deals and slowing deals down. You know, we've got a $60 million deal we're working on. Been under due diligence for a year, and the buyers are like, okay, every day this is costing me money. So a lot of buyers are kind of backing out of deals and very slow to pull the trigger right now these days. Then of course we have the midterms coming up, so you know people always want to wait and see, right?
Yeah.
So let's dig into your pat. Do you have any other advice, tips on M&A? You know, selling companies, because that's my bread and butter. That's my passion. That's what I do. Any tips for the listeners on mergers and acquisitions before we dive into your book?
Well, I think, you know, we're in a period now where it's hard to get things done because sellers' expectations are still high because, you know, we're just coming off of, you know, stock market being at an all-time high, and it takes time for people to readjust their views of what their valuation should be for their company, whereas buyers adjust much more quickly, and they see, okay, the stock market's down, the debt markets are closed.
Cost of
You
money
know,
is a lot higher.
cost of money is higher. The economy is looking shakier. I'm going to cut my valuation metrics, and so in that environment where the buyers have adjusted but the sellers haven't, it's hard to get deals done. So that's all I would say about that.
Okay. Well, let's dive into the power of failure, which I love the name, talking about GE and the rise and fall of an American icon. So, where would you like to start on your book? Would you like to start under Jack Welch's watch? And you know what? I actually met Jack Welch. I spoke with him on stage. I shared the stage with him. He's very, very nice. It's got, I tell you,
Where
it's
and
got.
when was that?
That was in 2020. Of course, you're going to test me on this. I have a picture with him back there. 2012, 2013,
Oh, okay.
2014, somewhere in that range.
So
Yeah.
after he was CEO.
Correct. So do you want to start there? Why don't you give us a synopsis of your book? Why did you write this book? And then kind of like take us through it. Good?
Sure. So my first, and I was as you were saying, I went to Columbia Journalism School, and then I was a newspaper reporter in Raleigh, North Carolina, at the Raleigh Times, covering public schools in Wake County, which was a very interesting job. Very, very poorly paying job, but interesting. And then I went back and got my MBA from Columbia, and my first job after graduating in 1987 was working at GE Capital in New York City, financing leveraged buyouts, providing financing to take companies private, or have buyout firms buy divisions of companies. And so I was there for 87, 88, and then in 80, part of 88, 89, I was working for the chief credit officer of GE Capital in Stamford, Connecticut. So basically in 2 years, I had this incredible exposure to GE and GE Capital. And so, I had that in my experience, my professional experience. I'm not sure I really knew what I was doing at that time, but I did it and learned a lot. And then I went and worked, as you said, at Lazard, at Merrill Lynch, at JPMorgan Chase. And then, I left in 2004. I decided to go back to writing, and this is my seventh book. And it turned out that by some sort of serendipity, which I find extraordinary, the guy who was my office mate when I first started at GE Capital in New York was a guy named John Flannery, who stayed at GE, and then after Jeff Immelt was the CEO, who he was the CEO after Jack Welch, John Flannery became the CEO. So my friend, who I'd known for 30 years, became the CEO of GE. So that was quite remarkable. And one thing led to another, and my conversations with him over the years, and when he became CEO, I mean, he would, things were unraveling a bit at GE, and he, would, occasionally share with me, how difficult it was to be the CEO of GE at that time, and how, many of the things that have now become public, he was uncovering for the first time. He lasted, and he would say to me things like, "Oh, you should write a book about GE." And I said to him, "Well, I can't, John. You're my friend and you're the CEO, so that would never, I can't do that. I couldn't be, objective." But after 15 months as the CEO, he got, relieved of his duties unceremoniously and unfairly, I might add. And so that's when I decided I would write this book to try to figure out what happened. Effectively, this once incredible company that started in 1892, which has, to some extent, Thomas Edison, the great inventor, in its DNA, and was the world's greatest conglomerate, the world's most valuable company, the world's most admired company, the world's most revered company, the company with the manager of the century, that was Jack Welch in the 20th century, was now in the process of dissolving, and beginning next year, it'll start breaking itself up into three pieces. And this company that was once worth more than $650 billion, the most valuable company in the world at that time, is now worth a fraction of that, roughly, 85 billion on a good day. And it's breaking itself up into three pieces. And so effectively, Michelle, there was a dead body on the floor, and I wanted to know how it got there. And so, as an investigative journalist and book writer, I decided this would be my next great mountain to climb. And it was quite a journey. It was quite hard. It was, 3 years of my life.
Wow, 3 years. I can't even imagine. I wrote Exo Rich in 6 weeks.
Yeah, well, normally I can write these books in about 2 years, but this one was an extra degree of difficulty because I started in 1892, going to the present, and it was a big, important, sprawling, complicated company with a lot of personalities and twists and turns. But the great thing is, for readers, is the story is incredible. The personalities are incredible. I mean, you can't beat Jack Welch as a personality, and Jeff Immelt as sort of a foil, and all sorts of crazy things that have happened over the years. So it's an amazing narrative. It's an amazingly gripping story, and I think I figured out what the heck happened in the end, but it took a while.
So, what can you walk us through where you're not giving away the book, but you're whetting their appetite to go out, run out and get it?
Yeah, fine line to walk.
Yeah. So one thing that I know that I read in your notes is that Welch was almost fired after being announced as as a new CEO because of drunken party at a celebratory party that shocked Greg Jones.
Yeah, that is true. Basically, after Jack it was
I mean, I
announced.
think we've all had those holiday parties.
Well, this was actually a party to celebrate Jack's selection
Yeah.
as the CEO that was thrown by his predecessor, Reg Jones. And you know, Reg Jones was like a straight-laced, button-down, old-fashioned sort of. He was born in Britain and moved to Trenton, New Jersey, and was went to Wharton, was pretty straight-laced and formal. He was an advisor to Jimmy Carter, who wanted him to be in the cabinet, but he declined. One of the founders of uh, the proponents of the Business Roundtable, and Jack was a much more hail fellow, well met, gregarious Irish Catholic guy from north of Boston, Salem, Massachusetts, only child, and always sort of punched above his weight, literally and figuratively. And Jack liked to party, and so at this party that Reg Jones had for Jack, upon announcing that Jack was going to succeed him, it was at the hotel on Madison Avenue, and Jack just partied it up, and Reg was sort of appalled at Jack's behavior until and Jack thought he might get fired because Reg was so upset. But then the next day, all these people who had been at the party were calling Reg, saying, what a great guy Jack was, and what a great choice Reg had made to choose Jack to be GE CEO. So that was the end of that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and I was so interested in having you on. That's why we reached out, is because I'm an entrepreneur. I live, breathe, eat entrepreneurship, and so many businesses go out of business. Steve Forbes, who endorsed my book, Exit Rich, states that 80 to 90% of businesses on the market will never sell. And as well as I do, great big brands, they're heroes, and then they go to zero, they go out of business. So I really wanted our listeners to experience and listen to, if this could happen to GE, this can happen to you, and really understand the pitfalls and what happened, what went wrong. How,
I mean, I think it's a very good point you
to
make.
where you're not giving away. What's that?
Yeah, I say it's a very good point you make. It's really a cautionary tale because, if it can happen to, one of America's most admired companies and the most valuable company in the world, I mean, why can't it happen to Google or Microsoft or Apple or, whatever the most admired companies are now that we think are sort of infallible? And the truth is that, mistakes get made. Um, and Jack made mistakes. Probably one of his biggest mistakes, at least is what he told me, was in selecting Jeff Immelt as his successor. He thought it was a good idea at the time in 2000. He thought it was the right choice, but ultimately it proved to be the wrong choice, or it proved to be that Jeff, did not handle his assignment deftly enough. He would say that Jack dealt him a bad hand. Jack told me repeatedly that he thought he had dealt Jeff Immelt a royal flush, and blamed Jeff for misplaying it. Obviously, both are spinning, but I think the truth, no surprise, lies somewhere in the middle. I think Jack made mistakes. He and would have been the first to, admit that. Made mistakes and usually recovered from them. Like, I'll give you one example. Like, he bought Kidder Peabody in 1986, which was an old line Wall Street Investment Bank. He had just bought RCA, which for $6.4 billion, which was the biggest M&A deal of all time to that point. And of course, RCA owned NBC. That's how GE got NBC back, as it turned out. In fact, GE had started NBC radio network in the 1920s, which is another part of the story. And then they had been forced to divest it in the 1930s. So Jack, anyway, bought it back in 1986, and then he bought Kidder Peabody. He was sort of feeling, hubristic because, the RCA deal was such a good one. But Kidder Peabody turned out to be a disaster. First, there was an insider trading scandal involving an M&A banker named Marty Siegel, who had left Kidder and gone to Drexel Burnham, but had done a lot of damage at Kidder before he left. And then there was another trading scandal involving a guy named Joseph Jett. And so basically between the two of those, the firm was kaput. It cost GE a lot more than they thought. But in the end, Jack was able to sell Kidder Peabody, or parts of Kidder Peabody, to Paine Webber, another brokerage firm, for Paine Webber stock. And then, right around the turn of the century, in 1999 timeframe, Paine Webber was sold to UBS, the big Swiss bank, for like $10 billion, and Jack and GE made out, got like $2 billion out of that deal, and they'd only paid, like $600 million for Kidder. So, long story short, that worked out. Other mistakes Jack made, also kind of worked out. You may or may not remember, right as Jack was about to retire in 2000, Jack decided that he wanted to buy Honeywell.
Mm-hmm.
United Technologies had surprised Jack by agreeing to do a deal for Honeywell. Jack had looked seriously at buying Honeywell too, but decided it was too expensive. But then when United Technologies announced a deal for Honeywell, taking Jack by surprise, he decided that couldn't be, that GE had to buy it instead. So he made a higher offer. Honeywell's board eventually went with GE, and it was like a $40 billion deal. It would have been the largest deal in GE's history, but the U.S. approved the merger, but then the European Union, didn't like the idea of the merger, and basically said to Jack that he had to divest a bunch of the businesses of Honeywell, and Jack just did not like that at all. And he complained to me and to others that it was like, wanting to buy an 18-hole golf course, but only getting 15 holes. And so Jack decided to walk away from the Honeywell deal in 2001. And shortly thereafter, Jeff Immelt took over. He took over as CEO 4 days before September 11th. So, I think in retrospect, it would have been a good thing for GE to have completed the Honeywell deal, even though Jack wasn't going to get all that he wanted out of Honeywell, because the EU was going to force him to sell some pieces. Not only did Honeywell go on to be worth more than GE in the subsequent years, but GE really needed to diversify its income stream away from GE Capital, and buying Honeywell would have allowed the industrial side of GE to become a bigger part of GE's profitability. because during the 2008 financial crisis, obviously companies in the financial services businesses, you will recall, had quite a tough go of it, and half of GE's earnings came from GE Capital. It was the largest non-bank bank in the country, one of the largest in the world. And even though all of the focus in the 2008 financial crisis was on Wall Street banks, really GE Capital was in dire straits, almost filed for bankruptcy twice, and had to get a bailout, a quiet bailout from Hank Paulson and Sheila Bair, the head of the FDIC. So, I think Jack's made two big mistakes. One was, as he said, choosing Jeff Immelt as his successor. The other one was not completing the Honeywell deal. Nevertheless, despite both of those things, when Jack turned the company over to Jeff Immelt on September 7th, 2001, GE was the most valuable company, in the world. And Jack was the most respected CEO, and the company was one of the most admired. So it's hard to say that, as Jeff does, that he got dealt a bad hand. I'd say he got dealt a pretty good hand that could have been much better, but was still pretty damn good. And I think, by the time that Jeff took over, 4 days later, we had 9/11, and of course the world changed dramatically after 9/11, as we all know.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So we can take those lessons and make them relatable to smaller type businesses. You always got to be extremely careful who you hire, who you put in charge, do your vetting. But like you said, there's
very important.
Yeah, extremely important. But there's always two sides to every story, right? And then acquisitions. Acquisitions can really catapult your company to the next level, or it can break your company. So you got to be extremely careful and make sure you do your due diligence. That's the two big lessons I got out of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also you have to the CEO has to really understand what the drivers of his or her business is. Like, GE Capital, was responsible for 50% of GE's earnings. And Jeff Immelt, even though he went to Harvard Business School, is more of a marketing guy, and I don't think really understood finance or the risks that were embedded in GE Capital, or the risks that were embedded in the way GE Capital financed itself, which was borrowing in the short-term commercial paper markets and then lending out money on a long-term basis. So it was doing, the classic mistake that banks make when they get into trouble, which is borrowing short and lending long. Mm-hmm. And I don't think Jeff Immelt really appreciated the risks that were inherent in that. And come 2008, when Bear Stearns went down the tubes, and Lehman went down the tubes, and Merrill Lynch went down the tubes, and Morgan Stanley almost did, and Goldman Sachs almost did, it's no surprise that GE Capital was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy as well.
When did you leave Wall Street?
2004. January 2004.
So you didn't get to be party to the 2008.
Well, except that I've written two books about the financial crisis. One, House of Cards, which was about the collapse of Bear Stearns, and one, Money and Power, which was about Goldman Sachs, but it's also about how Goldman Sachs avoided the fate that Bear Stearns and Lehman suffered.
Yeah, and there's a movie out about the Wall Street crisis too. I forget the name of it. I watched that movie. I forget the name of it.
Oh, well, there's been several. One of them was Too Big to Fail, which was based on Andrew Ross Sorkin's book of the same name. But there have been a number of movies about the financial crisis.
I forgot which one I watched. So those are the three main lessons there. What else? What else can you tell us about the rise and fall of American icon? And Look, I want to take a pause. People ask you questions. Ask questions to William. Ask him questions about acquisitions, M&A, the book, anything you want to. He's open to answering questions, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So what else was contributing factor to the rise and fall?
Well, I think people forget um, how important the technological innovations that GE was responsible for, how important they were to our everyday lives. Uh, you know, Light bulb, electric power, air conditioners, refrigerators, microwaves, X-ray machines, MRI machines. GE was one of the first manufacturers of electric cars. About 100 plus years ago. At one point, Henry Ford was working for Thomas Edison in trying to develop electric cars, uh, which GE did manufacture. And then, the problem was back then, which is not too dissimilar from today, although there's been a lot of progress, is that the charge on the on the batteries for the electric cars back then didn't last that long. Whereas you could fill up your car with what was then a very inexpensive, tank of gas, because they had discovered, oil, and that could be refined into gasoline, and they had the combustion engine that Henry Ford helped develop that relied on that as well. Uh, that was much cheaper and much more efficient than an electric car at that point. So that was sort of the end of electric cars back then. GE created the electric grid in Manhattan. It provided the electricity for the subway systems in Manhattan. It provided, electricity, up and down, the East Coast. It made the turbines for other utilities across the country. It made the first jet engines, and its jet engines are still the envy of the world. And it's creating jet engines that now, can run on hydrogen or even electricity that don't require jet fuel. And so that's being developed. It's providing the engines for a new breed of supersonic jets. Uh, it's MRI machines and X-ray machines and EKG machine. All those healthcare machines are the envy of the world too. And so, um, you know, we've of course take all that for granted now. It doesn't seem all that new and exciting anymore. But and then of course, in the 1920s, GE would provide financing to people who wanted to buy refrigerators or stoves, or fans or electric clocks or whatever it is, because during the uh, Depression, obviously, it was very hard to get money to buy those things. So that's how GE Capital, used to be called GE Credit, became a very, very important uh, player in finance, is because they financed the acquisitions of these GE products for customers. And then, GE was, of course, one of the very first components in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and GE was mostly, for the longest time, a AAA rated company. So Jack Welch sort of fell in love with the idea, and he told me many times it was a lot easier to make money from money than building, manufacturing a jet engine. He fell in love with the idea of arbitraging GE's AAA credit rating so that GE could borrow money very cheaply and then lend it out to borrowers very expensively. And that's the way GE Capital got into, as many as 20 different business lines, which, I learned about when I was working for the chief credit officer. It was just an incredible profit machine. And, to Jack's credit, he sort of understood, I think, the risks, or he had, management in place at GE Capital with Gary Wendt, and Dennis Naden, who understood the risks that were potential in a non-bank bank as big as GE Capital. So Jack was sort of like a orchestra conductor. He had risen up through the ranks of GE. In the plastics division. People don't remember that GE created. People think back to the movie The Graduate, and Dustin Hoffman being told to go into plastics because that was the future. Well, Jack was plastics, and GE created Lexan and other GE plastics that got melted down and turned into cars and all sorts of other things, and became incredibly successful. Since sold to the Saudis, and I think that people forget that Jack had this ability to orchestrate this incredible collection of businesses and get the most out of people, and really turn this into a well-oiled and reliable earnings machine. And the fact that something that dynamic and that successful and that admired, that so widely admired, and so uniquely American, could dissolve, go down the tubes, is kind of, and the fact that Jack, whose most important decision was choosing a successor, and he kind of blew it and admits to having blown it. It's rather Shakespearean, and tragic, and as I said, a real cautionary tale for other companies who think they're kind of invincible.
Can GE recover from this?
No, GE will not recover from this. It's being split up into 3 separate companies: a healthcare equipment company, a electrical power company, and a jet engine company. So there will be no more GE after this. There will be no more after 130 years. It's kind of sad.
Is the
Michelle,
name?
it's kind
Is it a name change too for these different divisions?
Well, the healthcare business is going to be known as GE Healthcare. The power business is going to be known as GE Vernova, of all things. And the jet engine business, I believe, will still be called GE. But, the GE as we know it will cease to exist.
It's very sad, like you said it. And it's happened to a lot of big brands, not just GE. It's happened to a lot of big brands. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's Joseph Schumpeter, the great, I think he was an Austrian economist, talked about creative destruction. We sort of see it happening in real time, not only with GE, but with Facebook, now Meta. Zuckerberg is at least trying to evolve Facebook away from what was an incredibly profitable business into this metaverse company, and the market doesn't really seem to be enjoying it very much. Stock is down 70%.
But that's
it happens,
change, right? As more people get acclimated, I think that's going to change, don't you? On a metaverse?
I don't think so. I think it's a big gamble. No, I don't think
I have a
anybody
client
wants.
right now. I have a client right now that's working on that, and that's a big part of their
Well,
plan.
we'll see. It's the jury is out.
So, what's the big takeaways from power failure? A big
The
life
the the,
lesson
the
for
danger
entrepreneurs.
of hype and hubris. Jack probably overhyped the company.
Mhm.
Jack had a way with the media, the business press that covered the company. He had a way with the Wall Street research analysts who covered the company, most of whom did not understand the finance part of GE, did not understand GE Capital or the risks there.
Mhm.
And then I think Jeff was hubristic. I think he thought he knew better. He didn't really. He would tell me he liked to listen to everybody and keep good people around him, but uh, he didn't really listen to people as well as he should. He didn't really take the advice of his top people and was content to have them leave if they did not, if they disagreed with him and didn't come around to his way of thinking. I know that's a little harsh. Obviously, he believes that Jack did not, as I was saying, did not leave him nearly the hand that Jack thought he had left him. But maybe he could have. Uh, it would have been better, as I said, if Jack had completed the Honeywell deal. Uh, you know, Jeff did not understand the risks that were inherent in the way GE financed itself, especially on the GE Capital side. He didn't listen to people who were trying to tell him about the risks. Bill Gross, the great, king of bonds at PIMCO, tried to warn him. Jeff didn't listen. S&P, the credit agencies tried to warn him. He didn't listen. When he spun off GE's insurance businesses into Genworth Financial, he left behind two businesses that would later, uh, come back to haunt GE. 17 years later, 15 years later. Uh, Jeff overpaid for Alstom. He sold NBC Universal too cheaply and in a panic. He dismantled GE Capital after the financial crisis and really had no way to replace those earnings. Um, so, uh, mistakes were made, as they sometimes
Well,
say.
that happens a lot of acquisitions. That due diligence is it's rushed, and buyers don't always do their due diligence, and there's always skeletons in the closet, especially on the smaller transactions, and the seller hypes things up, and the buyer doesn't always find where
Yeah.
the bodies are buried. And so it kind of happens in normal everyday transactions too.
I mean, there's a lot of risk in doing deals, and GE did more deals than almost any other company. It was a
But
M&A
that was
machine.
also was beneficial because it also probably contributed to their growth as well.
Yes, but
Um,
was it
sure.
real growth, or was it what I like to call sort of M&A growth, which is growth that you make an acquisition, it befuddles the analysts because the numbers are all being mashed together and you can't tell what's a restructuring charge and what's a one-time charge and goodwill charges and all sorts of impairments, and
Yeah.
it just sort of obfuscates what's really going on in the P&L of the company for another year. And then if you keep doing acquisitions all the time and divestitures all the time, which they did, I mean, they were really an M&A machine. So if you were an M&A
Yeah.
banker on Wall Street, it would be great to have GE as a client. I mean, you really a lot, people had a lot of trouble telling, what GE's real earnings were, how much were real and how much were M&A related, how much were restructuring charges, how much were gains on sales, offsetting losses and other part. And a lot of people complained. They thought that Jack was engaging in accounting shenanigans and that GE was engaged in accounting shenanigans. And they paid fines because of accounting misadventures. Um, you know, I it was kind of hard to parse through all that. I mean, I think uh, I think Jack felt it was very important. If he told the street he was going to make a certain amount of earnings, that no matter what, he did that, and I think he did that for all 80 or most of the 80 straight quarters that he was CEO of GE. He either exceeded or met or exceeded Wall Street analyst expectations, which helped contribute to the incredible increase in value. When Jack took over, GE's market value was $12 billion, and when he was left, it was something like 600 billion.
Wow. So what were your biggest takeaways, your biggest lessons from Wall Street? 17 years on Wall Street, gotta have some huge lessons, some big stories, something. Give us something from Wall Street. Or do we have to go read your books?
Yeah. Well, I would just say, Wall Street's a dangerous place. People forget, we were reminded in 2008 how dangerous a place Wall Street can be. And it's a dangerous place to work, too, for your mental and physical health. It's rewarding financially, but it's a very difficult place to work. And it makes people crazy.
Makes people crazy, huh? How long do people last on Wall Street typically? What's the average? 10 years.
I mean, it burns people out. It's,
Yeah, because
the
it's so
hours are long. People treat each other very poorly. These are generalizations, of course. There's always exceptions. I spent 17 years. That seemed about as long as I could possibly take it. But, people I started with are still there. 30 years, been there 30 years, 35 years, Felix Rohatyn, who, worked at Lazard, he was probably the, banker for 60 years.
wow.
So there
So
are
what's
people
your
who just do it. Can't imagine doing anything else.
and they're working like 70, 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week, right? That's
The
a
junior
tremendous
people,
amount.
yes, not the senior people. They make the junior people work, hundreds of hours a week.
So, all right, what is your outcome? What is your biggest dream that will come out of power failure? What is your biggest hope? What is your biggest dream? Obviously, making the New York Times again.
Well, every writer wants to become a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, I'm one of them.
Yeah, right. No, I just, people buy the book, read the book, appreciate, enjoy the story that I tried to tell, that I think I told. It's an incredible story. It's worth reading. It's a long book. It's a big book, but
How many
my feeling
pages?
is, it's about 750 pages.
Wow,
Uh,
3 years in the
uh,
making.
my view is if I'm reading a book that I'm really enjoying, then more of it is good. So that's the kind of book, I guess I write for that way of thinking. I try to make it as interesting and exciting the whole way through. But yeah, it's long, but it's a important big story to tell, and so that's why I did it.
Mine's 325 pages, so you're double the size. And so you really got to be passionate about this to dedicate 3 years. One of the questions that came in was, does William have any advice for those writing books, finding a good agent, publisher, etc.? Because everybody says you don't make money off of writing the books. You have to have a good ROI, return on investment, good way to capture those leads. That's why I write books is brand awareness, lead capture, etc. But what's your thoughts? What's your advice there?
Well, I'm not capturing any
Well, you're
leads.
not. You're a well-known
Right.
author.
Well, I don't know whether I am or not, but I mean, this is what I do now.
Yeah.
Having been a banker, this is what I do.
What do you like
And
better, banking or writing?
oh, there's no question. But had I not been a banker, I couldn't be this kind of writer. So there's it was a synergistic relationship between the two. But I have a much better life now. I have my own equity. I control my own hours. I can be where I want, when I want. Nobody's telling me what to do or how to do it or when to do it. So that kind of freedom, you can't put a price on that. And that's the opposite of what you have when you're, a banker on Wall Street. You have no freedom.
Yeah.
Everybody's always telling you what to do. And, success has many fathers and failure's an orphan.
That's a great line. I love that. Repeat that line one more time.
Success has many fathers and failure is an orphan.
An orphan. All right. So what do you have any advice for those listening that would like to get into writing, would like to write a book, writing the first book, second book, third book? I've written 3. Any advice on that?
Well, I'm sure it's no different than what you could offer, but it's really hard work. You have to be dedicated to it. It's like a full-time job. You have to put your butt in the chair every day and your fingers on the keyboard, and you have to, have a passion for the topic because it's going to be lonely and there's going to be no one helping you. So, you don't do it, nobody's going to get it done.
That's right. And then you can, come up against mental writer's block as well, which has never really affected me because all the content's in my head. I know what I'm writing about, so I don't really face writer's block, but I know many other writers do. What advice do you have on finding a good agent, publisher, things of that nature? Any good advice on that?
You probably do need to have an agent to get to the publishers because that's the agents are the gating issues. Yeah.
But once you're a New York Times bestseller, it's much easier to get in front of the publishers. But any agents you recommend, or any way to find good agents doing?
Word of mouth, I think, is probably
word of mouth.
Talk to your friends who are writers and ask them who their agent is and if they would recommend.
Well, can you say who your agent is and if you recommend your agent? Because you're my good friend.
Sure.
I'm talking to.
My agent is a woman named Joy Harris.
Joy Harris.
She has her own literary agency, and she's been my agent for 20 years now.
All right, we'll put that in the comments, Joy Harris, and she's really good. All right, awesome. So what's next for you, William? I mean, you've dedicated 3 years to this book. I'm sure you've got other books in the pipeline. What's next for William?
I'm going to, Michelle, as you know, it's not enough to write a book. You also have to sell a book. So I'm now going into selling the book mode for the next, certainly till the beginning of January. And then I'll take a deep breath, take stock and see where I am and see if I have the energy to do this again.
To me, the selling part is harder than the writing part, for sure. But so you're going to do the selling part, get on a New York Times bestseller. Do you have any projects in mind? You might not be able to talk about
I have ideas. I'm not ready to talk about them, but I have ideas. Yeah, we'll have to see where the market is, what might be interesting, what's going to interest me, and what's going to interest my publisher.
And you might have one book being turned into the movie, right?
Yes, but many a slip between cup and lip. You never know.
So how do so where should our listeners go buy the book? Are you in pre-sale?
Yeah, sure. Amazon, anywhere you want to go.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I'm sure you're going to be in Hudson stores everywhere.
Sure. Wherever your books are sold.
Any last minute tips, strategies, advice? Most of my listeners are entrepreneurs, typically starting in business, but most of them are very successful entrepreneurs looking for exits, which I do help them with, of course.
Don't give up. Don't lose faith. Don't give up.
Don't give up. Don't lose faith. What keeps you going?
Just that.
Huh?
I'm on a mission. I have a job to do. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So you just gotta keep after it every day.
You've been an amazing guest. Thank you for so much for coming on. And I can't wait to hear about your next project when you make the New York Times best-selling author, which I know you will. We'll have you back on because I know it's going to be a great story, well in demand. Thank you so much for coming on, William Cohan. You've been a
Thank
great
you.
guest. Thank you to my audience. Thank you to all the Exit Rich subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you go subscribe to Exit Rich. Make sure you share this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your fellow entrepreneurs. Share it with your network. Get the word out there. Let's help William Cohan become a fourth time, right? Fourth time New York
Fifth,
Times best-selling
fifth,
author.
fifth,
Let's
fifth.
make it happen. We're entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. So let's make that happen. Thank you, William, so much for coming
Thank you,
on.
Michelle.
Great
Take
guest.
care.
Thank you.
Let's all just exit rich if we can.
Yes, let's all exit rich. Amen to that. Thank you again, William. Thanks
Take
to
care.
all of us rich listeners.
Bye-bye.